The rope burns where it circles her wrists. Cassia is 26 years old, and she can feel the coarse hemp cutting into skin that has never known anything rougher than silk. You can smell the stable stench of animals and old straw that fills this wooden building at the edge of the Roman camp. Can hear through the walls the sounds that her two younger sisters are making, not screaming, not yet, but the high keening of terror that comes before screaming, the sound of girls who have seen what is being prepared for them and cannot process what it means. She was, until 9 days ago, Princess Cassia of Pontus, eldest daughter of King Mithratis, a woman raised in palaces overlooking the Black Sea, educated in Greek philosophy and Persian poetry, betrothed to a prince of Armenia whose kingdom would have doubled her father's power. She was the jewel of her father's court, the pride of his dynasty, the future queen of an empire that would have stretched from the Caucasus to the Euphrates. Now she kneels in stable filth, her ceremonial robes torn and stained, her hair matted with dirt and dried blood from a wound on her scalp that no one has bothered to clean. Around her, Roman soldiers move with the casual efficiency of men performing routine work, checking ropes, adjusting equipment, leading animals into position. They do not look at her. She is not a person to them. She is a component in whatever apparatus they are constructing. Through a gap in the wooden slats, she can see into the adjacent stall. Her sister, Laodice, 19 years old, is bound to a post in the center of the space, her arms pulled behind her and tied so that her body is forced into an arch, her face streaked with tears she no longer has the strength to wipe away. Her sister Nisa, 18, barely more than a child, is in the stall beyond, similarly bound, her small frame trembling so violently that Cassia can see the vibrations from 30 feet away. And in each stall she can see what the Romans have brought. The horses, massive cavalry stallions, war horses, selected for size and temperament, held by handlers who know exactly what these animals will do when released toward a bound and helpless woman. She has heard of this punishment. Every kingdom that bordered Rome had heard of it, whispered about it, used it as a warning to those who considered resistance. The Romans called it many things, depending on which commander ordered it and what purpose it served. Sometimes it was spectacle performed before armies to demonstrate the consequences of defiance. Sometimes it was private, conducted in camps and prisons where only the soldiers witnessed what occurred. But always it involved the horses. Always it involved women bound in ways that left them exposed and defenseless. Always it ended the same way. Her sisters are to be subjected to this, Laodice and Nisa, who have done nothing except be born to a king who dared to challenge Roman expansion, who built a coalition that threatened Roman control of the eastern trade routes, who won 3 battles before the 4th destroyed him and delivered his family into the hands of General Lucius Cornelius Crassus. Crassus. She memorizes the name, adds it to the mental ledger she has been keeping since capture, the names of officers, the hierarchy of command, the patterns of authority that governed this camp. Information is the only weapon available to her, and she has been gathering it with the desperation of someone who knows that knowledge might be the only thing standing between her sisters and the fate being prepared for them. A man enters the stable. He is perhaps 50 years old, wearing the armor of a senior commander, his face bearing the weathered marks of decades of campaign. His eyes move over the scene with the practiced assessment of someone inspecting equipment rather than witnessing the preparation for atrocity. This is General Crassus. She recognizes him from the surrender, from the moment when her father knelt in chains and was informed of the fates his children would suffer. The youngest first, Crassus says to the officer beside him. 18 is old enough, and her screams will help motivate the others. Nisa, they're going to start with Nisa.
Cassia feels something shift inside her. The fear that has paralyzed her since capture does not disappear, but it recedes, pushed aside by something older and stronger. She has spent her entire life protecting her sisters. She taught Laodice to read when their tutors gave up on her. She held Nyssa through nightmares when their mother died. She has been their shield against court politics, against the expectations of their father, against the thousand small cruelties that palace life inflicted on royal daughters. She will not stop now. General Cassis. Her voice comes out steadier than she expected, cutting through the ambient noise of the stable, drawing attention from soldiers who had been ignoring her. I would speak with you. Crassus turns, his expression shifting from dismissal to curiosity. Prisoners do not typically address their captors, certainly not prisoners about to witness their family's destruction. The Pontic princess speaks, he says. What could you possibly have to say that would interest me? An offer, Cassia says, one that will benefit you more than watching children scream. She sees interest flicker in his eyes. Romans are pragmatic above all else. Even cruelty served purposes for them: intimidation, entertainment, the satisfaction of soldiers who had endured hard campaigns. If she can offer something of greater value, she might be able to redirect the cruelty to take upon herself what was meant for her sisters. What offer? Take me instead. All of it. Whatever you planned for them, do it to me. All 3 portions of punishment concentrated on one body. I am older, stronger. I will last longer. The spectacle will be greater. Crassus studies her. She can see him calculating, weighing the entertainment value of what she proposes against the original plan. Your sisters are younger, he says, more appealing to certain tastes. 3 is more than 1. Why would I accept less? Because I have information, the locations of treasure my father hid before the final battle, the names of Roman officers he bribed during the war, the routes of the supply networks he established with Partha. She is gambling now, mixing truth with fabrication, hoping that greed will override other appetites. Give me my sister's safety, genuine safety, not death in a different form, and I will give you everything I know. I could torture the information from you. You could try, but I was raised in a court where poison was served at every meal and assassination was casual conversation. I know how to die quickly when I choose to. Torture me and you will get nothing. Accept my offer and you will get intelligence that will make your career and wealth beyond what this campaign has already provided. She watches him process this, watches the calculation happen in real time. Romans are not sentimental, but they are ambitious, and ambition can be leveraged. The horse, he says slowly, you understand what you are offering to endure. I understand. It will not be quick, it will not be private. My officers have earned entertainment, and I will not deny them. I understand. And your sisters will watch. That is part of the arrangement. They will watch what you endure for them, and they will know what they have been spared. Cassia feels her stomach revolt at this addition, but she forces herself to nod. If they are truly spared, if they are given safety afterward, genuine safety, not slavery, not being sold, not being given to soldiers, what would you consider genuine safety? Send them to Rome, to the household of someone who will treat them as guests rather than slaves. Let them live out their lives in comfort, even if it is comfort in exile. This is what I am buying with what you are about to do to me. Crassus is silent for a long moment. Then he smiles, and the smile is worse than anything she has seen from him so far. You love them, he says, truly love them. That is rare in royal families. Most would sell their siblings for an extra hour of comfort. My sisters are the only family I have left. My brothers were killed in battle. My father will be executed after the triumph. My mother died years ago. Laodice and Nyssa are everything. Then we have a bargain. He turns to the officer beside him. Release the younger two from their preparations, bring them here to witness, and prepare the eldest for extended use. The words land with physical weight. Extended use. She knows what that means. Not a single horse, not a single session, but multiple animals, multiple days. Whatever duration Crassus decides will provide adequate entertainment for his officers. But Leodish and Nyssa will live. They will be safe. They will grow old in Rome while she endures whatever is coming. It is enough. It has to be enough. What you are about to learn has been deliberately obscured by 2,000 years of historical sanitization. The Romans who wrote the histories that survived were not interested in documenting what happened to the daughters of defeated kings. They mentioned triumphs and victories, recorded the names of conquered monarchs, noted the treasure that flowed into Roman coffers. But the women, the princesses and queens who were captured alongside their fathers and brothers, were reduced to footnotes, mentioned only as parts of the procession, their ultimate fates left unspecified. Tonight you will learn what those unspecified fates actually were. You will learn about the punishment that Roman generals reserved for royal women who represented conquered dynasties, the methods designed not merely to destroy individuals, but to annihilate bloodlines, to demonstrate so completely Rome's dominance that no one would ever again think resistance was possible. You will learn about the role of animals in Roman punishments, why certain methods were chosen for certain victims, what purposes the spectacle served beyond mere cruelty. You will learn about the hierarchy of suffering, why some captives were killed quickly, while others were subjected to prolonged degradation, what determined which fate a prisoner received. You will learn about the women who chose to endure these punishments to protect others, the mothers who bargained their bodies for their children's lives, the sisters who took upon themselves what was meant for siblings, the impossible arithmetic of sacrifice that Roman captivity forced upon its victims. You will learn why Cassia made the choice she made, what happened during the days that followed her bargain, and what became of the sisters she was willing to destroy herself to protect. Subscribe if you want to understand what Roman victory actually meant for those who experienced it as defeat. Comment below telling me where you are watching from, because Cassia is about to be prepared for what she agreed to endure, and I am going to tell you exactly what that preparation involved. But before I describe what happened to her in that Roman camp, I need to take you back. I need to explain why this punishment existed, what function it served, and what function it served in Roman military culture, and why generals like Crassus believed it was not merely acceptable, but necessary. Because you cannot understand what Cassia endured without understanding the system that made her suffering useful. The Roman punishment involving horses was not random sadism, it was calculated terror, designed to serve specific military and political purposes. Rome's eastern conquests had created a problem. The kingdoms of Asia Minor, Pontus, Bithynia, Cappadocia, Armenia were not like the tribal societies Rome had conquered in Gaul and Hispania.
They were sophisticated civilizations with long histories, established dynasties, populations that remembered independence and resented subjugation. Conquering these kingdoms was relatively straightforward. Keeping them conquered was far more difficult. The solution that Roman commanders developed was spectacular violence. Not merely defeating enemies, but annihilating them so completely that resistance became psychologically impossible. This meant destroying not just armies, but symbols, burning temples, melting down sacred objects, and most importantly, degrading royal families in ways that stripped them of any remaining dignity or claim to leadership. Royal women were particularly important targets because of what they represented. In the ancient world, dynasty continued through women as much as men. A captive queen might be ransomed and bear sons who would claim their grandfather's throne. A captive princess might be married to a rival king who would use her bloodline to legitimize his own claims.
Even as prisoners, royal women remained potential threats to Roman control. The punishments inflicted on these women were designed to eliminate this threat permanently. Not through simple execution, death created martyrs, and martyrs inspired resistance, but through degradation so complete that the women themselves became symbols not of resistance, but of the futility of resistance. A princess who had been subjected to public humiliation with animals could never become a rallying point for rebels. Her status had been destroyed more thoroughly than death could accomplish. The horses served multiple functions within this system. First, there was the practical element. Horses were available in any military camp, required no special equipment, and could be used repeatedly without significant preparation. The logistics of punishment mattered to Roman commanders who might need to process many captives in a limited time. Second, there was the spectacle element. The punishment created visual imagery that witnesses would never forget and would share with others, spreading the message of Roman dominance far beyond the immediate audience. Soldiers who witnessed the degradation of a foreign princess would tell the story for years. The story would travel through the empire and beyond, reaching ears that would learn from it exactly what Rome did to those who resisted. Third, there was the symbolic element. Horses represented military power, the cavalry that had crushed the enemy's army. Using horses against the enemy's women completed a symbolic circuit. The same force that had destroyed the kingdom's power was now destroying its future through its princesses. This was the system that had created the punishment Cassia had volunteered to endure. Not madness, not arbitrary cruelty, but calculated destruction, serving purposes that Roman commanders considered entirely rational. The fact that these purposes were served by acts of extreme violence against defenseless women was not considered a moral problem. The women were enemies. Their suffering served Rome. Roman morality did not extend protection to those outside the boundaries of civilization, and enemy kingdoms, by definition, were outside those boundaries. Now let us return to the stable where Cassia has made her bargain and the preparations for fulfilling it are beginning. The soldiers approach her with ropes and implements she does not want to examine closely. They are professional, efficient, their movements suggesting they have done this before, perhaps many times. One of them cuts away her ruined ceremonial robes with a knife that passes close enough to her skin that she can feel the cold of the blade. Another begins the process of binding her in the position required for what is coming. Wait! The voice is not Crassus. Cassia turns her head and sees a younger officer, perhaps 30, wearing the insignia of a tribune. He is watching the proceedings with an expression she cannot read, not the eager anticipation of the other officers, not the professional detachment of the soldiers performing the work. "General," the tribune says, addressing Crassus, "a word, if I may." Crassus gestures impatiently. The tribune approaches and speaks in a low voice that Cassia strains to hear. The intelligence she mentioned, the hidden treasury locations. If she dies too quickly, or if her mind breaks before we can extract the information, we lose that value. She agreed to give the information in exchange for her sister's safety. She agreed under duress, facing the immediate prospect of watching her sisters suffer. People say anything in such circumstances. If we want reliable intelligence, we need her coherent, cooperative, believing that her cooperation serves her goals. Crassus considers this. Cassia watches the calculation happen again, the weighing of entertainment against practical value. What do you suggest? Delay the intensive measures. Begin with something that demonstrates we are serious but preserves her capacity to provide information. Extract what she knows, verify what can be verified, then proceed with whatever entertainment you deem appropriate. And her sisters? Keep them safe, but keep them present. Her cooperation depends on believing we will honor the bargain. If we harm them before she's given us everything, she has no reason to continue cooperating." Crassus nods slowly. "You make a reasonable argument, Tribune. What is your name?" "Marcus Antonius Priscus." "You have a future in command, Priscus. You understand that cruelty should be purposeful rather than merely satisfying." He turns to the soldiers. "Hold the preparations. Move the princess to the officers' quarters. We will extract her intelligence before proceeding with the entertainment." Cassia feels a complex wave of emotion, relief that the immediate horror has been delayed, terror at what intensive measures still implies, and something else when she looks at the tribune who intervened. Not gratitude exactly, she is not naive enough to think he acted from kindness, but recognition perhaps. Recognition that he is someone who calculates, who thinks beyond immediate satisfaction, who might be useful. She files his name away. Marcus Antonius Priscus. Another piece of information for her ledger. The officers' quarters were a tent at the center of the camp, furnished with the comforts that senior Romans expected even on campaign. Cassia sat on a stool before a table where Tribune Priscus had arranged writing materials, papyrus, ink, a map of the region that she recognized as reasonably accurate. Her sisters had been taken to a different tent, guarded but not bound, with orders to keep them comfortable. She had seen them briefly as she was led across the camp. Lidic's face, still tear-streaked but no longer frozen in terror. Nisa clinging to her sister's arm with the desperate grip of a child who has seen too much. They were alive. They were safe, for now. Everything else she could endure. "The hidden treasury," Priscus said. "Start there." Cassia had spent 9 days preparing for this moment. During the journey to the camp, during the hours of captivity before the stable, she had been constructing a web of truth and fiction, real information mixed with plausible lies, designed to keep her valuable as long as possible.
"My father had 3 primary treasury locations," she began. "The first was at Sinope, in a vault beneath the Temple of Poseidon. This one the Romans have already found. I know because I saw your soldiers loading the gold onto ships during my transport." Priscus nodded. This was verifiable information, establishing her credibility. The second was Atomos, in a cave system 3 miles east of the city. The entrance is concealed behind a waterfall. Inside there were approximately 400 talents of silver and 200 talents of gold, plus gems that have not been appraised. You know the exact location? I visited it twice with my father. I can draw a map. She took the pen and began sketching, her hand steady despite the terror still coiling in her stomach. The treasury at Amisos was real. Her father had shown her the location as part of her education in dynastic resources. Giving it away felt like betrayal, but betrayal of a kingdom already destroyed was a small price for her sister's survival. And the third? The third is more complicated. Here she began weaving in the fiction. My father established it in cooperation with Parthian allies in a location east of the Euphrates. I know the general region, but not the specific site. That information was held by my brother Mards, who died at the Battle of Kabira. Priscus studied her. You're saying the third treasury may be beyond recovery? I am saying that recovering it would require negotiation with Partha, which may be more valuable to Rome than the gold itself. I know the names of the Parthian officials my father worked with. I know the terms of their agreements. This intelligence could be used to approach them or to expose them to their own king as Roman sympathizers. She was improvising now, building structures of partial truth that would take time to verify or disprove. Every day spent verifying was a day her sisters remained safe, a day she remained valuable, a day the worst punishments remained delayed. The bribed Roman officers, Priscus said. You mentioned those as well. I did, but that information is more sensitive. If I give you names and those officers learn they have been exposed, they become dangerous to you, to General Cassus, to anyone who might testify against them. You are bargaining. I am protecting my value. Once I have given you everything, I have nothing left to trade. My sister's safety depends on my continued usefulness. Priscus looked at her with something that might have been respect. You are smarter than most captives. I was raised to rule a kingdom. I was educated by the finest tutors my father could hire. I speak 6 languages, understand 3 systems of law, and have read more history than most of your senators. She met his eyes directly. I am exactly as smart as you would expect a princess of Pontus to be. The question is whether you are smart enough to use that intelligence rather than destroy it. A long silence. Then Priscus smiled, and the smile was not cruel, merely calculating. I will speak to General Cassus, he said. Continue working on the map to Amisos. We will resume tomorrow. He left her alone in the tent, guards posted outside, but no one watching her directly. She continued drawing the map, making it detailed enough to be useful, accurate enough to withstand verification. And while she drew, she thought about Marcus Antonius Priscus, about what he wanted, about how she might use him to protect her sisters. He was ambitious. She had seen it in the way he had interrupted Cassus, inserting himself into a situation where he had no official role. He wanted advancement, recognition, the career benefits that came from association with successful commanders. She could give him those things. The intelligence she possessed could make his career if he was the one who delivered it to Rome. If she could bind his interests to her sister's survival, she would have a protector whose motives were not kindness, but self-interest, far more reliable than any kindness could be. It was the beginning of a strategy, the beginning of hope. The days that followed established a pattern that Cassia learned to navigate. Each morning she was brought to the officers' quarters to provide intelligence. She gave it slowly, carefully, mixing real information with fabrications that would take time to verify. The treasury at Amisos was confirmed by a scouting party, establishing her credibility and raising the value of everything else she might reveal. The Parthian connections proved interesting enough that messengers were sent to Rome requesting guidance on how to proceed. Each afternoon she was permitted to see her sisters. These visits were monitored but not prevented. Priscus had convinced Crassus that the visits maintained her cooperation, that a woman who could touch her sisters was more motivated to provide accurate intelligence than one who only heard reports of their continued survival. Leotis and Nisa were being held in a tent near the camp's edge, guarded but not mistreated. They had been given food, water, clean clothing. The terror of the first days had faded into something more sustainable, a chronic fear rather than acute panic. They were surviving. "How long can you keep doing this?" Leotis asked during one visit. She was the more practical of Cassia's sisters, the one who understood politics and calculation. "Eventually you will run out of information. What happens then?" "Then I find other ways to be useful. Romans need translators, scribes, people who understand Eastern customs and languages. I will make myself necessary. And if you can't, then I will have bought you enough time to reach Rome, to establish yourselves, to find protectors among the Roman families who collect Greek-educated companions. You are beautiful and educated and royal. There are Romans who will value that." "At what cost to you?" Cassia did not answer immediately. The cost had been made clear, delayed but not canceled. Cassus still intended to fulfill the original purpose of the punishment. He simply intended to do it after she had provided all her useful intelligence. "It does not matter what happens to me," she said, finally. "It only matters that you survive." "That is not true. You matter. What happens to you matters." "Not to Rome, and we are in Rome's power now. We must think like Romans, calculate values, weigh costs, accept trades that preserve what is essential, even at the price of what is dear." Nisa, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke. "I don't want to survive if it means you suffer."
"I would rather die with you than live knowing what you endured for us." The words hit Cassia like a blow. Her youngest sister, the one she had protected since infancy, was offering to share her fate rather than accept salvation at its price. "No," Cassia said, her voice harder than she intended. "You do not get to make that choice. I have already made it for you. You will survive. You will grow old. You will remember me as someone who loved you enough to do what was necessary. And you will not waste that gift by dying out of misplaced solidarity." Nisa began to cry. Cassia held her, stroking her hair, murmuring the same comforting sounds she had made when Nisa was a child with nightmares. But the comfort she offered was different now. It was not reassurance that everything would be fine. It was the harder comfort of accepting that everything would not be fine, that survival required enduring what could not be changed. 3 weeks into her captivity, Cassia received unexpected news. Tribune Priscus came to her quarters with an expression she had not seen before. Not calculating, not professional, but something that looked almost like excitement. "Orders from Rome," he said. "The Senate has taken an interest in your intelligence about Parthia. They want you transported to Rome for further interrogation." "Interrogation?" "A formal inquiry. Senators will question you about the Parthian connections, the eastern trade routes, everything you know about the political situation beyond the Euphrates. If your information proves valuable, there will be rewards. Not freedom exactly, but improved conditions, status as a source rather than a prisoner." Cassia processed this. Transportation to Rome would mean leaving the camp, leaving the immediate control of Crassus, entering a different system with different rules. "My sisters, they will travel with you. The Senate specified that your cooperation depends on their well-being. They understand the arrangement." "And General Crassus? He had plans for me." Priscus's expression shifted slightly. "The general has been informed that your intelligence value exceeds your entertainment value. He is not happy, but he is Roman enough to accept senatorial authority. He will find another way to hurt me. Perhaps, but not immediately, and not here. In Rome, you will have other protectors, other interests competing for your value. The immediate danger has passed." Cassia should have felt relief. Part of her did feel relief, but she had learned to distrust good news, to look for the traps hidden within apparent salvation. "What do you gain from this?" she asked Priscus. "You arranged this. You intervened with Crassus. You advocated for my value. You sent communications to Rome that prompted this interest. What is your purpose?" Priscus looked at her with something approaching admiration. "You truly do understand politics. I was raised in them. I gain advancement. The senator who is most interested in your Parthian intelligence is a patron of my family. If I deliver you to him as a valuable source, my career benefits. If your information proves accurate, my judgment is vindicated. If it helps Rome's eastern strategy, I share in the credit. So I am a gift. You are giving to advance yourself. You are an opportunity we are both exploiting. You want your sisters safe. I want career advancement. Our interests align. This is how alliances work." Cassia considered this. Priscus was not pretending to be her savior. He was not claiming kindness or sympathy. He was simply acknowledging the transaction that connected them, the mutual benefit that made cooperation possible. This, she realized, was more trustworthy than any claim of compassion would have been. Self-interest was predictable. Kindness was not. "When do we leave?" 3 days. The general wants to complete certain administrative matters before releasing you to senatorial custody. "What matters?" Priscus hesitated. "He wants a public acknowledgement of his authority, a demonstration that he controlled your fate even though he is relinquishing you." "What kind of demonstration?" "A ceremony, public submission to Roman authority, performed before the army. Nothing physically harmful. The Senate has made clear that you are to arrive in Rome intact and capable of providing testimony. but psychologically significant. He wants the soldiers to see that you bend to him, even though you are escaping the punishment he originally intended. Cassia understood. Crassus had been denied his entertainment. He wanted something to compensate, some visible proof of his dominance that he could point to when other officers asked why he had released a valuable captive. What will the ceremony require? You will kneel before him publicly. You will speak words of submission that he will provide. You will kiss his feet as a gesture of acknowledgement. Your sisters will witness this, as will the entire camp. Humiliation rather than destruction, a wound to her dignity rather than her body, in the ledger of costs and benefits that governed her existence now, this was acceptable. This was survivable.
I agree. I thought you would. You understand the calculation. I understand that my pride is a small price for my sisters' lives. Tell General Crassus he will have his ceremony. The ceremony was held at dawn on the day before departure. The entire camp assembled in a hollow square, soldiers in formation, officers on a raised platform, the Roman standards gleaming in the early light. Cassia was led to the center of the square, dressed in a simple white tunic that Crassus had specified, the clothing of a supplicant, a penitent, someone seeking forgiveness from powers greater than themselves. Her sisters watched from the edge of the platform. She had prepared them for what they would see, had explained that the humiliation was strategic, that bending allowed them to avoid breaking. Laodice had understood immediately. Nyssa had wept, but had promised not to interfere. General Crassus stood at the front of the platform, his armor polished, his expression satisfied. He had lost the punishment he wanted, but he was gaining something almost as valuable, a public display of dominance over a foreign princess, proof that Rome's power reduced even royalty to groveling submission. "Princess Cassia of Pontus," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent square. "You stand before Rome as representative of a kingdom that defied Roman authority, that challenged Roman power, that dared to believe it could resist Roman will. Your father is in chains, your brothers are dead, your kingdom is a Roman province, and you, the last heir of your dynasty, come before us to acknowledge the truth that your family refused to accept." He paused, letting the words settle over the assembled soldiers. "Speak your submission." Cassia had been given the words the night before. She had memorized them, practiced them, stripped them of emotional weight so that she could speak them without breaking. "I, Cassia of Pontus, acknowledge that I have no kingdom, no throne, no authority except what Rome permits. I acknowledge that my life continues at Rome's pleasure, that my family's survival depends on Rome's mercy, that everything I was and everything I might have been belongs now to the Senate and people of Rome." The words tasted like ash, but she spoke them clearly, audibly, giving Crassus the performance he required. "Kneel." She knelt. The ground was hard, pebbles pressing into her knees through the thin fabric of the tunic. "Lower." She prostrated herself, forehead touching the ground, arms extended toward the platform where Crassus stood. "Approach." She crawled forward on hands and knees, the position of a supplicant, a slave, an animal. The soldiers watched in silence, some with expressions of satisfaction, some with discomfort that they quickly suppressed. She crawled until she reached the base of the platform, until Crassus's boots were directly before her face. "Complete your submission." She kissed his feet, leather and dust, and the sour taste of humiliation that she would carry for the rest of her life. She kissed them as her sisters watched, as 1,000 Roman soldiers watched, as the sun rose over a camp where she had almost been destroyed and was instead being degraded in ways that would be remembered, discussed, laughed about in the years to come. And then it was over. Crassus stepped back, his satisfaction visible. "Rome accepts your submission," he announced. "You will proceed to Rome to serve the Senate as they require. Remember what you have done here today. Remember that you live because Rome permits it." She was lifted to her feet by soldiers who handled her impersonally, returned to her sisters, whose faces showed the horror she had warned them to expect. She did not cry. She did not show any emotion that might suggest the ceremony had affected her. Inside, she added this to the price for her sisters in the capital of the empire that had destroyed everything else they had known. The journey to Rome took 6 weeks. Cassia and her sisters traveled with Tribune Priscus and his escort, moving through a landscape that shifted gradually from eastern frontier to Italian heartland. They passed through provinces where the conquest of Pontus was already being celebrated, where their father's name was spoken as an example of barbarian arrogance, where news of the coming triumph spread excitement through populations eager for spectacle. The triumph. Cassia had almost forgotten about it in the immediate crises of the camp, but Rome's triumphs required captives, and she and her sisters were the highest-ranking Pontic captives available. They would walk in chains through Roman streets, while crowds cheered their humiliation. "What happens during the triumph?" Nyssa asked during one night's rest. She had begun to recover from the trauma of the camp, her resilience slowly returning, but questions still emerged that revealed how little she understood of what awaited them. "We will march in the procession," Cassia said, "bound, displayed, presented as proof of Roman victory. It is humiliation, but it is not dangerous. Many captives have survived triumphs and lived long afterward." "And after?" "After depends on our usefulness. If my intelligence proves valuable, we may be kept as sources, translators, perhaps eventually granted some form of limited freedom. If not," she did not finish the sentence, "if not, they would be disposed of in whatever manner served Roman purposes, sold, executed, given to citizens who wanted exotic slaves."
"You should prepare them," Priscus said quietly, appearing beside her. He had been traveling at a distance, maintaining the separation between escort and escorted, but he occasionally approached for conversations that the other soldiers could not hear. "The triumphs will be difficult. The crowds are not kind. I know you do not know. You have heard descriptions, but you have not experienced what a Roman crowd becomes during a triumph. They are drunk, many of them, excited by the spectacle, eager to demonstrate their superiority over the conquered. They will throw things, they will shout things. Your sisters, especially the younger one, may not be prepared for what they will hear." Cassia turned to look at him. "Why are you warning me? This serves no advantage for you." "Perhaps I am developing a conscience," he smiled slightly. "Or perhaps I am protecting my investment. If one of your sisters breaks during the triumph, if she does something that disrupts the procession, the consequences will fall on you. And if you are damaged, my delivery of valuable intelligence is delayed. Self-interest and conscience sometimes align. What do you recommend? Train them mentally. Teach them to go somewhere else in their minds during the procession, to hear without hearing, to see without seeing. The triumph will last perhaps 3 hours. They need only endure for 3 hours. Then it will be over, and a different kind of survival will begin." Cassia looked at her sisters, both sleeping in the wagon that carried them. Leodish, 19, already showing the hardness that exposure to horror could create. Nyssa, 18, still soft in ways that worried Cassia constantly. "I will prepare them," she said. "Thank you for the warning. Thank me when we reach Rome. Thank me when the triumph is over and your sisters are still capable of functioning. That will be when my investment matures." He returned to his position, leaving Cassia with the task he had set her, preparing her sisters to endure 3 hours of concentrated hatred from a city of 1 million people, celebrating their family's destruction. The triumph was worse than Cassia had imagined, and she had imagined terrible things. They entered Rome through the Porta Triumphalis, the gate reserved for victorious generals and their spoils. The streets were lined with crowds that pressed against soldiers holding them back, faces flushed with wine and excitement, voices raised in a constant roar that made individual words impossible to distinguish. Cassia walked in chains with her sisters, positioned near the front of the captive procession, behind the wagons of plunder and before the mass of ordinary prisoners. Their placement was deliberate. The general wanted the royal captives visible, wanted the crowds to see what remained of the Pontic dynasty reduced to shuffling prisoners. The chains were heavy, iron links connecting her wrists to her ankles in a way that forced her to take short, stumbling steps. The tunic she wore was deliberately inadequate, thin fabric that hid little and that the crowd seemed to find amusing. Her sisters were similarly dressed, similarly chained, similarly exposed to the inspection of a million eyes. Things were thrown, rotten vegetables, animal dung, occasionally stones that the soldiers were supposed to intercept, but sometimes did not. Cassia was struck twice, once on the shoulder by something soft and foul-smelling, once on the forehead by something hard enough to draw blood. She kept walking. The shouts were worse than the projectiles, the things the crowd called her, the things they promised to do to her sisters, the graphic descriptions of punishments that some voices screamed with obvious enthusiasm. She had prepared Leodish and Nyssa for this, had taught them the technique Priscus had suggested, retreating inside, hearing without processing, surviving the moment without being destroyed by it. But preparation could only do so much. Halfway through the procession, as they passed the forum where the crowds were densest, Nyssa stumbled and fell. The chains made it impossible to rise gracefully. She sprawled on the paving stones, and the crowd roared with delight at this display of foreign helplessness. Cassia moved immediately. The chains connecting her to her sisters gave her just enough range to reach Nyssa, to crouch beside her, to help her rise. A soldier approached with a whip, ready to encourage faster movement, but Cassia placed herself between the whip and her sister. "She walks or I do not walk," Cassia said, "and if I do not walk, your general loses his prize captive, and someone will answer for it." The soldier hesitated, calculating. The procession was slowing, the crowd's attention focusing on this small drama. Finally, the soldier lowered his whip and gestured for them to continue. Cassia supported Nyssa for the rest of the procession, half carrying her sister through streets that seemed endless, past crowds that never tired of their hatred. Leodish moved to her other side, lending what support she could. The three of them, forming a unit that moved together, supported each other, refused to be separated. This was what Cassia was protecting. Not just their lives, but this, the connection, the sisterhood, the love that the Romans were trying to destroy along with everything else. As long as they could still support each other, they had not been completely defeated. The triumph ended at the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, where General Crassus received the formal acknowledgement of his victory. The captives were led away to holding cells beneath the temple, while the celebration continued above them. In the darkness of that cell, with her sisters pressed against her on either side, Cassia allowed herself to feel what she had suppressed during the procession. The humiliation, the degradation, the raw hatred of a million voices wishing her harm. It crashed over her in waves, and for the first time since her capture, she wept. But she wept silently. Her sisters needed her to be strong, needed her to represent hope that survival was possible. She would not burden them with her own despair. When morning came, she would be strong again. When morning came, she would face whatever the next phase of captivity required. For now, in the darkness, she could grieve for everything they had lost. The years that followed the triumph were a different kind of survival.
The Senate's interest in Cassia's intelligence proved genuine and sustained. She was housed in the residence of Senator Marcus Caecilius Rufus, the patron of Priscus's family, in conditions that were comfortable by captive standards. She had her own room, servants who attended her, food that was adequate, and sometime her sisters were kept with her,
the three of them forming a small Pontic household within a Roman mansion. In exchange for these conditions, Cassia provided everything she knew about Partha, about Eastern trade routes, about the complex web of alliances and enmities that characterized the world beyond the Euphrates. She met with senators and military planners, answered their questions, drew maps, explained customs that Roman observers had misunderstood. She became gradually valuable in ways that went beyond her initial intelligence. Her education proved useful. She could translate documents, compose letters in 6 languages, explain the nuances of Eastern diplomatic protocol that Romans found baffling. Senator Rufus began bringing her to meetings, using her as an interpreter and advisor for visitors from the Greek-speaking East. Her sisters adapted to different roles. Leodis, with her practical intelligence, became skilled in household management, eventually overseeing the domestic arrangements for Senator Rufus's extended family. Nisa, who had nearly broken during the triumph, discovered a talent for music. Her voice and her skill with the lyre made her a valued entertainer at the dinners where Roman elites gathered. They were not free. They were captives, living comfortable lives at their master's pleasure. Their survival depended on continued usefulness, but they were alive. They were together, and each year that passed without disaster seemed to confirm that the worst was behind them. Tribune Priscus, now Legate Priscus, his career advancing exactly as he had planned, visited occasionally. His relationship with Cassia had evolved into something difficult to categorize. Not friendship exactly, not patronage in the traditional sense, something between, built on mutual recognition of each other's intelligence and mutual benefit from continued association. "You have done well," he observed during one visit 5 years after the triumph. "Many captives in your position are destroyed within the first year. You have not merely survived, but established yourself." "I have established my usefulness," Cassia corrected. "That is not the same as establishing myself." "Perhaps not, but usefulness is what Rome values. You have learned to provide it." "I learned because the alternative was watching my sisters destroyed. Every skill I have developed, every service I have provided, has been for them." Priscus studied her. "You truly made that bargain in the camp. When Crassus intended the punishment, you would have endured it?" "Yes." "Do you regret that it was not necessary? Some would say the uncertainty of delayed punishment is worse than the certainty of immediate suffering." Cassia considered the question. She had thought about it many times over the years, wondering what would have happened if Priscus had not intervened, if her intelligence had not proved valuable, if the original purpose had been fulfilled. "I do not regret avoiding the horses," she said finally, "but I do not consider myself saved either. I have traded one form of destruction for another. The punishment Crassus intended would have destroyed my body. The survival I have achieved has required destroying other parts of me. My pride, my identity as a princess, my sense that I control my own existence. I am intact physically, but hollowed out in other ways." "That is more honest than most people are capable of being. I have no reason to be dishonest with you. You know what I am. You helped create what I am. We can speak plainly to each other because we are both complicit in my transformation." Priscus did not dispute this. The transaction between them had never been disguised with pretensions of nobility. "I may have an opportunity for you," he said, "a chance to establish something beyond usefulness. Interested? Tell me." "Senator Rufus has no heirs. His children died in a plague 3 years ago, and his wife did not survive the grief. He is considering adoption, bringing someone into his family to continue his line. He has mentioned your sister Leodis as a possibility." Cassia felt something shift in her chest. Adoption would make Leodis a Roman citizen, would give her legal status, property rights, a future that did not depend on continued usefulness to masters. Why would he do this? He has grown fond of her, and he is practical. Adopting a captive of royal blood connects his family to the Eastern networks he relies on for trade. Her knowledge of Pontic customs, her connections to families that remember the Old Kingdom, these have value. He would be acquiring an asset as well as a daughter. What would this require of Leodis? Marriage to a man of his choosing eventually management of his household, production of heirs to continue his line, the normal expectations of a Roman daughter. And Nyssa and me? Nyssa would remain in the household as part of Leodis's entourage. Your situation is more complicated. You are the original source of intelligence, the one the Senate values. Transferring you from senatorial access to a private family would require negotiation, but it would be possible, eventually, if Leodis's adoption proves successful. If the arrangement works as intended, there may be opportunities to expand the family's collection of Eastern experts. He paused. I am not promising anything. I am identifying possibilities. Why are you telling me this? What do you gain? I gain a contact in an influential family. If Leodis is adopted, her gratitude toward the person who facilitated it, toward me, becomes an asset. And if you eventually join the household, your intelligence-gathering capabilities remain accessible through a different channel. He smiled slightly. Everything I do serves my interests. You know this. But sometimes my interests align with your well-being. Cassia absorbed this. It was not salvation.
It was another transaction, another trade of values, another step in the complex dance of survival that had governed her existence since the camp. But it was hope, real hope, for the first time since capture. The possibility that her sisters might achieve something beyond mere survival, might become Romans rather than remaining captives, might have futures that did not depend on continued usefulness. Tell me what I need to do, she said. The adoption of Leodis took 2 years to arrange. There were legal complications. Roman adoption law had not contemplated the adoption of foreign captives of royal blood. There were social complications. Other families objected to Senator Rufus elevating a barbarian princess to Roman citizen status. There were political complications. Some senators worried that giving citizenship to members of a defeated dynasty might create precedents that would be exploited later. Cassia navigated these complications with skills she had never imagined developing. She cultivated relationships with influential wives, providing fashion advice and cultural knowledge that made her valuable in the feminine networks that influenced Roman politics from behind the scenes. She provided intelligence that helped Senator Rufus's allies in their various schemes. She became gradually a presence in Roman society that was difficult to categorize but impossible to ignore, and she protected her sisters throughout. When a rival family attempted to have Leodis accused of practicing Eastern magic, Cassia produced evidence that discredited the accusers. When a young Roman noble developed an unhealthy interest in Nyssa, Cassia arranged for him to be distracted by a different target. When rumors circulated that the Pontic sisters were spies for Partha, Cassia fed counter-rumors that positioned them as valuable assets that Rome could not afford to lose. She had become, without quite intending it, a power in her own right, not the power of a princess, not the formal authority she had been raised to expect, but a different kind of power, the power of someone who understood systems, who could manipulate them, who had learned to survive by making herself necessary. The adoption was finalized in the spring of her 33rd year. Cassia watched as Leodis, now Celia Leodis, took the formal vows that made her a Roman citizen. She watched as her sister received the ring that marked her new status, as she was presented to Roman society as a daughter rather than a captive. Nyssa wept through the ceremony. Cassia did not. She had learned to suppress visible emotion years ago, but she felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for 7 years. One sister saved, one transformation complete. Leodis would have a future now, would marry a Roman, would bear children who would be citizens by birth,
would live a life that was not defined by the catastrophe that had destroyed their family. One down, one to go. Nisa's transformation took a different form. She had no interest in adoption, no desire to become Roman in the way Leotis had. Her identity remained Pontic, her heart still connected to a kingdom that existed only in memory. But she had developed skills that Rome valued. Her musical abilities had made her famous in circles where such things mattered. Cassia helped her negotiate a different path. Rather than adoption into a family, Nisa became a professional musician under the patronage of a consortium of wealthy families who wanted exclusive access to her performances. She was not a citizen, but she was not a slave either. She occupied a gray zone in Roman society, a foreign artist whose talent placed her above the normal categories. She lived independently, eventually in a small house, purchased from earnings from her performances. She never married. Roman law made marriage between citizens and non-citizens complicated, and she never found a man worth the complications. But she lived well, performed widely, and achieved a form of freedom that Cassia had not imagined possible when they first arrived in chains. The younger sister Cassia had carried through the triumph, the girl who had nearly broken under the weight of that humiliation, had become a woman who could stand on her own. 2 sisters saved, 2 transformations complete. Only Cassia remained trapped in the role she had created for herself, the intelligence source, the advisor, the useful captive whose value kept her safe, but also kept her bound. The final transformation came in Cassia's 40th year. Senator Rufus died of a fever, and his estate passed to Leotis and her husband, Gas Caecilius Metellus. Cassia had been prepared for this transition, had spent years building relationships that would survive the senator's death. But Rufus's passing also created an opportunity that had not existed before. The intelligence relationship between Cassia and the Senate had been mediated through Rufus. With his death, that relationship needed to be renegotiated, and in the renegotiation, Cassia saw a chance to finally change her own status. Leotis Priscus, now Senator Priscus, his career having advanced exactly as he had planned, served as her advocate in the discussions that followed. She has provided 14 years of valuable intelligence, he argued to his colleagues. She has been instrumental in 3 diplomatic initiatives and 2 military campaigns. Her knowledge of Eastern affairs has saved Roman lives and advanced Roman interests. At some point, we must acknowledge that continued captive status does not serve Rome's purposes. The debate was lengthy. Some senators worried about precedent. Others wanted to maintain leverage over Eastern contact, who knew Cassia was technically still Rome's property. But Priscus had built alliances carefully, and the alliances held. On the summer solstice, 14 years after she had knelt in a stable, preparing to endure a punishment designed to destroy her, Cassia was granted formal freedom by act of the Senate. The ceremony was nothing like the triumph.
No crowds, no chains, no humiliation. Just a formal acknowledgement in a marble chamber witnessed by senators who had benefited from her intelligence and by sisters who had survived because of her sacrifice. Leotis, now a Roman matron with 3 children, wept openly. Nisa, the famous musician whose performances commanded the highest fees in Rome, held Cassia's hand throughout the ceremony with a grip that said everything words could not. And Cassia, for the first time in 14 years, allowed herself to feel something that was not fear or calculation or the grim determination of survival. She felt free. The years that followed were different. Cassia remained in Rome, where her skills still had value, but she worked now as a free consultant rather than a captive source. She advised senators, trained diplomats, wrote analyses of Eastern affairs that circulated among the powerful. She was respected, sought after, treated as an expert rather than a trophy. She never married. The years of captivity had left marks that did not show on the surface, but that made intimacy impossible to contemplate.
She had given too much of herself away, had sacrificed too many parts of her identity to have anything left for a husband or children. But she had her sisters. Leodis's children called her aunt and visited regularly, filling her house with the noise and chaos of family she had never expected to have. Nyssa performed at her dinner parties, their childhood connection transformed into adult friendship, the girl she had protected now a woman she genuinely enjoyed. And she had the knowledge of what she had achieved, not triumph, not glory, not the restoration of her family's kingdom, but survival, transformation, the successful protection of the people she had been willing to destroy herself to save. In her 63rd year, Cassia fell ill with a fever that the physicians could not treat. She knew, with the clarity that approaching death sometimes brings, that she would not recover. Her sisters came to her bedside. Leodis, now a grandmother herself, gay-haired and dignified in the Roman manner she had adopted. Nyssa still performing despite her age, still bearing the grace that had made her famous decades ago. "You saved us," Leodis said, "in that camp when you bargained yourself for us. Everything that came after, the triumph, the adoption, the careers, the children, all of it began with your choice." "I did what any sister would do." "No, you did what only you could do. You saw the opportunity. You calculated the risks. You made the sacrifice. We are alive because you were willing to endure things that should have destroyed you." Nyssa took her hand. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Cassia considered the question. She thought about the stable in the camp, the ceremony before the army, the triumph through Rome's streets, the years of providing intelligence to people who saw her as a tool rather than a person. "I regret that it was necessary," she said finally. "I regret that we were born into a world where my choices were so limited, where sacrifice was the only way to save what I loved. But do I regret choosing to protect you? No. I would make the same choice again 1,000 times, every time." She died that night, with her sisters holding her hands, in a house she owned, in a city that had learned to respect her. Her funeral was attended by senators, diplomats, the children and grandchildren of people she had advised over decades. Her eulogy was given by a senator who had known her since the camp, who had watched her transform from captive to advisor to free woman. She survived, he said, because she understood that survival required sacrifice. She protected her sisters when no protection should have been possible. She served Rome while never forgetting who she had been, and she achieved, in the end, a dignity that those who conquered her kingdom could not have imagined granting to its princess. Leodis and Nyssa stood together at the funeral, the sisters she had saved, the purpose that had sustained her through 14 years of captivity and 23 years of freedom. They lived long after her. Leodis died in her 82nd year, surrounded by children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, who bore Roman names but knew the story of their Pontic heritage. Nyssa lived to 90, performing until her voice finally failed, a legend in Roman musical circles whose origins as a captive princess had been half forgotten by those who celebrated her art. But they never forgot Cassia. They told her story to their descendants, passed down the memory of what she had done, ensured that her sacrifice would be remembered long after the Senate's records had been lost. The princess who saved her sisters, the captive who protected what she loved, the woman who bargained with monsters and won. Remember Cassia. Remember the princess who knelt in stable filth and offered herself for her sisters' lives. Remember that when she was presented with a horror designed to destroy everything she was, she did not beg for herself. She did not offer information to save her own body. She offered to take upon herself 3 times the punishment so that her sisters would be spared. Remember that this offer was not made from ignorance. She knew exactly what she was volunteering to endure.
She knew what the horses would do. She knew that the punishment would be prolonged, public, designed to break her in every way that mattered, and she offered anyway, because her sisters' lives were worth more to her than her own intact body, because protecting them was more important than protecting herself, because some forms of love require sacrifices that destroy the one who makes them. Remember that the sacrifice was deferred, not canceled. She did not escape the consequences of captivity. She escaped only the most extreme physical punishment. The years that followed required other sacrifices, other destructions, other surrenders of self that were less dramatic but equally real. Remember that she succeeded. Leodis became a Roman matron. Nyssa became a famous artist. Both lived long lives, had futures that seemed impossible in that stable, were protected by the bargain that Cassia had made. Remember that protection is not the same as escape. The protector does not save themselves, they save others, and in saving others, they find a purpose that makes survival meaningful, even when it costs everything else. Remember the daughters of defeated kings, not just Cassia, but all of them, the women who were captured alongside their fathers, who faced punishments designed to demonstrate Roman dominance, who made choices that the histories rarely record. Some were destroyed, some survived, some protected others at the cost of themselves. Remember them all. Subscribe if you want more hidden histories revealed. Comment below telling me where you're watching from. Share this video with anyone who thinks they understand Roman conquest from the stories of battles and generals, because Roman conquest was not only the defeat of armies and the destruction of kingdoms, it was also Cassia bargaining in a stable for her sisters' lives. It was also the triumph where 3 women supported each other through streets filled with hatred. It was also the slow, painful work of rebuilding existence from the ruins of everything they had known. Remember what Roman generals did to the daughters of defeated kings. Remember what the daughters did to save what they loved.